Welcome to this fourth session within the AI Cultural Sabotage series. And today we are with Sarah Ciston. Sarah, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Sarah. I'm an artistic researcher interested in creative critical coding and critical AI. Currently looking at AI warfare and all the different ways that AI could be more intersectional and diverse and serve the people that it's impacting most.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's a great honor to have you here today. I will start straight with the first question, which is, of course, about your AI War Cloud database. You defined as an interactive research and visualization project that maps the shared infrastructures, logics, and corporate actors behind both consumer AI products and AI-enabled warfare. Just as a note, you won the grand prize of the European Commission honoring innovation in technology, industry and society stimulated by the arts this year. There you stated that when you start to connect points, they never stop. You see where data flows. And you have given you have given some examples that now are quite renowned, such as the Roomba vacuum cleaner and how it plays from the industry both ways, and of course the Palantir software. Can you explain briefly these two examples? And do you see this work after that? Do you see this work as a work in progress to be periodically updated? Or should it be seen as a dynamic snapshot at a certain point?
Sure. Well, I think the Roomba and Palantir are two really interesting examples because the one, Palantir, is this sort of is self-styled as this sort of monolith. We're going to change the way Silicon Valley thinks about itself and its mission in the world, that it should be here as this almost savior for democracy, and should be, we can do what the government was trying to do faster, better, break, takes the Silicon Valley mindset and applies it to weapons, technology, puts them together and goes out into the world and moves fast and breaks things, to quote the Facebook mindset, right? So Palantir has got its tentacles into everything, both on the commercial side and the military side. And so that's kind of what's really interesting about Palantir is they're using all of the commercial tools that we're familiar with, that we might have on our phones already, all of the large language models that we are using kind of as toys and tools already now, your ChatGPTs, your Claude, things like this, Meta, and they're incorporating them into their tools, which are being used by the US military. They're being used in Ukraine. They're also, though, being used by the US ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. They're being used by the UK NHS, the healthcare systems. They're moving into all of these places that are overlapping in really interesting ways. And then the Roomba example is almost the opposite, but shows how these shifts happen in both directions, or in all directions, because Roomba started out as the vacuum company that we're all familiar with, these cute little robot vacuums that move through your home. But at the same time, they're collecting data about the rooms that they're moving through. And so also at the same time, though, they're the startup company that's not quite able to make money off of the idea as they're they're selling these products. So they're also developing materials for the military. They're making these bomb sniffing robots and putting those out there. So they've got these two strands of the company happening at the same time. And they're using the same technology that they've developed commercially in a defense context. And eventually they end up splitting the company in two and deciding that the defense side is much more profitable. They end up selling the commercial side to Amazon. Amazon's really interested in all of the data of all of our homes that they've mapped, probably for more nefarious purposes, who knows? And they've split off, and iRobot, the parent company of Roomba, has become a completely military company. So those two examples, I think, are really powerful because they're really tangible and they show how it's kind of gotten into everywhere, and how these shifts that I'm trying to show across commercial and defense spheres can happen in all directions and can get into really unexpected places, like a vacuum cleaner in your home you would not think has any connection to defense technology or anything that could be harming people or have an impact in that sphere. And so to your question about work in progress or a snapshot, to me, this is a continual work in progress, because every single day I've been finding more things to add to this database. And unfortunately, there's really no stopping point. At any moment could be a dynamic snapshot. But really, it's always been a challenge of scoping it to, okay, it's between these years or it's these kinds of tools. I've been really careful to try to scope it to specifically decision-making systems. So I'm not as much looking at the drones and the weapons themselves as the AI technology that's making decisions that help drive those weapons. But even with that scoping, there are so many, and I have so many tabs open on my computer of things that need to be added. And even beyond that, there are all of the material and infrastructure supports, all of the global mining, all of the chips, all of the NVIDIA, all of these companies that support all of that decision-making tech that are left off of this still. So this is a project that could go on forever, in my mind. And it's just a matter of like when you look at it at a particular moment.
Okay, thank you. The AI work called database, let's say, sets in a kind of tradition of making maps of power. I can mention, of course, the work of Bureau d'Etudes, but there was this specific historical net art piece by Josh On called The Day Rule in 2001. Back in the days, he created this web-based database, web-based interactive data visualization project showing the connection between people sitting on different boards in Fortune 100 companies, showing also through a very dynamic interface and quite almost allegorical interface, this frightening connection, how the power was actually distributed in a handful, the most power in a handful, I mean, in a very small amount of people. This work has quite the trajectory. It starts, I mean, almost 25 years ago, so it's a long trajectory. It was even cloned in different countries, making the local one, so it was quite inspirational. I was just curious if this work was inspirational for you, and how do you see it after almost 25 years?
Yes, I think about all of these kinds of net art projects and tactical media, especially from this long tradition of like early internet and digital digital computational media work that is meant to kind of expose how systems are working, both the digital systems and the socio-technical systems more broadly. So I think about that piece. I think a lot too about work happening now with groups like the Tech Inquiry Project, which is mapping these sorts of connections across warfare and power, and the work being done at Disruption Network Lab and their research project on the Kill Cloud. But definitely, and the activism work by groups like No Tech for Apartheid has absolutely been inspirational too. But my own practice, even before this project, comes from a strand of deep interest in electronic literature, net art, and tactical media. So absolutely, and I hope that this continues on in that strand and can also be used as a tool for other people so that it can be taken up. And that's why it's all open source and open access, that it could be adapted for other types of use or be taken up by researchers or contributed to by others. It certainly shouldn't be a project of just one person.
Great, thanks. So it's completely the infrastructure. I mean, the software infrastructure is open access, so it's completely accessible and eventually usable also by other people freely,
Correct.
more or less.
Correct.
That's really useful to know, of course.
Yeah, that also informed the design of it. I don't know if that might be of interest only to a certain subset of people, but rather than trying to put it into a big database or even put it on Amazon Web Services, which is in the database, trying to think about how it's built so that it's really readable to people who maybe don't have technical expertise. Like you could open the file and look at it and hopefully understand it without that technical expertise.
Yeah, that's also extremely important, especially for this activist process, how they can be accessed, which of course goes, it goes all together with the project itself and with the nature of the project itself, I would say.
Completely.
And but there is this very strong conceptual level that your project is built upon. You clearly stated that the military, we should intend military now as a testing ground for commercial AI systems. And I would say it's also vice versa, more or less, for how you explain it. And if we're speaking of history, if we look at the history of analog and digital systems, and we can find plenty of examples from, of course, computer networks. The very first internet, we all know, was actually a military project, but even video recording. When we started to have commercial video recording, if you track it back, actually it was also a project funded and developed in the military research environment. So it's not too far from reality to say that every mass technology was initially developed for military use, or at least most of them. So you stated that now the difference, respect to this history, is that algorithms make decisions. Do you mean there is now an autonomous strategic component of software that was not previously embedded in these technologies?
Not exactly. I think it's very tricky because a lot of the rhetoric of AI hype is very much designed to treat it like it's autonomous and it's deflecting the responsibility onto the systems, right? And diffusing it and making it feel like it's almost maybe more rational, or that we should be putting the decisions onto the systems. So I think the difference, there are differences now in how these systems are running. But to your point that this has been part of a longer trajectory, I think it's very important to keep that in mind, because we do have many examples of this, and this is part of the tradition, and we do have tools for addressing and combating, and we have communities of practice that have thought about this for a very long time. So we're not out in completely new territory. And I do think it's important to realize that this is always an entanglement of people and their tools, that it's never one or the other. It's always socio-technical. So we are not at any sort of stage close to a singularity or an autonomous system altogether. I think that we are much more in the stage of we have systems that along the way have been specialized at different points to have algorithms make contribute specific suggestions or choices, right? And then at some point they say it's okay because there's a human in the loop deciding this. But my question is always, what does it mean for a human to make the decision if the entire decision has been algorithmically constructed along the way? Like if I'm presented with 4 choices, but all of those choices have been selected by the system or have been presented to me and curated in such a way that they've been, the data has been processed so thoroughly by an algorithmic system that I wouldn't know where it came from or what it means without the system. Is that really a human decision? But on the flip side, there's always humans all the way through. So we're never really free of each other. And I would be very careful to say autonomous. I know there are very technical definitions of autonomous. We have autonomous vehicles. We have different levels of autonomy that we can technically ascribe to different tools. But for conversational purposes, I would not put that on these systems. What I do think is different now, that is thinking what's important to think about these systems that's different is the level of scaling up, the level of accelerating and amplifying that is happening, both in the amount of damage, destruction, and death that they can impose, and the level of bias and kind of so thinking about the mistakes that can be made in the damage, death, and destruction that they can impose, right? So we know that the militaries themselves, the U.S. military brags that they have gone from 20 minutes to 20 seconds in deciding who is a target, right? When you're making that decision, that means you can much more quickly kill people. And it also means that you're much more likely to make mistakes when you're doing that.
Yeah, the social technical, I think, is a very key element in your trajectory. Yeah. And referring to the social part, during your recent keynote, you said that information gathering is conditioned by my own position, which was a very clear statement about saying, yes, this is a work trying to gather objective information, but in any case, we have to consider that the whole garden of data that I've grown up and developed is subjective somehow. And I think this is a quite interesting position here, because when we think about the overwhelming power generated by AI companies, my question is, isn't the singular and personal position becoming more relevant than ever compared to the attempt to universalize everything through software?
I think so. I think the mistake that gets made with this this idea that we can even universalize is that this so-called universal position is itself a subjective position. It's just a position of power. It's not universal. It's this particular position of those in power. And it gets, it takes all of our subjective positions, or those that are legible to power. It's not everyone's position. It's just those that are legible to power. And it smushes together, and it takes the lowest common denominator of those, and it decides this is what counts. This is what data can see. This is what will count through the algorithm, and presents this as everything, or everything that matters. And that's very different from saying, this is where I stand, this is who I am, and this is how I see it from where I'm coming from. But I acknowledge that there are other things out there and other places to stand and other data that might be missing, or other data used for other purposes. It would be very different to design systems saying, we made this system for this goal and we collected data in this way because this is what we were looking for. If we were looking for something else, we would be collecting data differently, right? To start from goals and purposes and with a sense of who your subjects are and who your audience are, rather than we're going to collect everything and it's going to do everything, is this very flattening colonialist empire mindset, right? So I think we're missing a lot when we think about AI systems that way, and this totalizing, totalitarian approach. So I hadn't put those two things together about the way that I designed the project or the AI. I do think about how AI systems use language to do that kind of flattening a lot, but I hadn't thought about that with how I present the project. So that's nice to think about. Thank you. But it was really important to me to acknowledge that I was noticing when I was searching for information from Europe, where I live, I couldn't find a lot about China. I couldn't find a lot about Russia. When I was visiting the US, I had an even harder time finding these things. I'm limited by the fact that English is my primary language, so I'm not able to find as much about these other things. But also, the reason that these are centered around Europe and the US and these different powers is this is also who is doing most of the militarizing, right? We're not going to see a lot from Africa or South America because that's not who are aggressors in this particular context, right? So, but I do notice that if I lived in Russia or China, maybe I would have more information there, or maybe I wouldn't because of how information spreads. I don't know because I'm not there. And so I wanted to just acknowledge that this is who I am and this is how I get information.
I mean, it connects perfectly to the next question, because you use the word intersectionality as an analysis of power, looking at tactics of power. But you use this word, I mean, the use of this word leads to a call to apply this analysis also to other media and technologies. Technological infrastructures. I can think about social media, streaming platforms, which are apparently kind of safe and guarded commercial spaces. Do you think that there's a room somehow to use intersectionality also in different other media and technologies? Or do you think there's an urgency to focus mostly on what you have analyzed?
No, I don't think it's exclusive to what I have analyzed. I mean, my understanding of intersectionality comes from Black feminist scholars and communities, and focuses on how intersectionality is not only, it's an analysis of power and institutions, but thinking about how they impact individuals differently because of difference, right? So I think that there's a lot of room right now, and it's very necessary to look at how power impacts difference differently, if that makes sense. That is happening in all contexts, in many social contexts, how all of these institutions and social infrastructures and material infrastructures that are built up impact everyone differently because of the sort of cultural differences that are projected onto us, right? So I started my practice from intersectionality and kind of moved into AI rather than the other way around, and saw this as a place that could use these tactics and ethics and theory rather than starting with AI, if that makes sense. I think that there are many communities thinking about intersectional practices and tactics already, and I just saw that AI was a space that was asking the questions that intersectionality already had been dealing with for decades, if centuries in some capacity, and that this could be brought into that space. So I think there are many other spaces that we could think about this kind of analysis of power and difference.
And it's a subjectivity, but also the discourse that you can build around it connects, just to bring it back for a second, to some of your background, because you have also developed various experiments in literature supported by software. And here comes the inevitable question about language, of course. So do you think that a strategic use of language can contribute to reclaim our human territories from the aforementioned power dynamics? So basically, what's, in your opinion, you have used and dealt a lot with it, what's the importance of language, the strategic importance of language in these dynamics?
And that's that's no small question at all.
No, I know it's quite big. So let's say, just to have a starting point, that's to say that for me it was not surprising, but I was intrigued by the fact that you had this kind of background and the work has a quite a very powerful visual component that really allows the user to navigate information through the visuals infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But of course, there's an equally extremely important discourse behind it. But in the, let's say, in the immediacy of exploring, the language is kind of behind the visual impact. And I was intrigued that you had this background, and then the work is instead done this way. So I was thinking then, what's the value that you attribute also to language, to the use of language, to the use of proper language, I would say, in these dynamics as well? Because I'm sure you have already used it this way, and you have thoughts about it.
Yeah, so language is the reason that I got into looking at AI systems in the first place, actually. Several years before large language models became the vogue, back when everybody was excited about image generation, I was sort of dismayed about language models and thought, oh, I'll study this because this seems really troubling. And I, I was interested in the internet and what it was doing to language, and I was interested in how this connection with the digital and language and how they were shaping each other. And I really, my technical interest in AI is always explored through language and how language moves through these systems. So I do feel like my starting point is always a kind of secretly, as a poet, looking at how language moves through these systems, even if it ends up not being expressed first through language. There's always this careful attention to it. I think that reclaiming it from the direction that it's going is going to take all of us on all fronts, all of the things that we have, including how, exploring how we can use language in different ways against it, exploring how we can use the systems kind of against the grain, against the ways that they've been designed, designing different systems. And that includes playing with language. It includes all different kinds of approaches. But I think that there, because of where I come to it from, that the language piece is always going to be something of a starting point for me. And I think it works all across, from the way that I saw the kind of hype around AI and the obfuscation of the language, to my kind of frustration with that and trying to learn about AI systems from as somewhat of an outsider, and feeling like, really, it can't be that difficult. Why am I struggling to learn all of this? Like, how can I dig in and make the terms more accessible for other people once I've kind of pushed through? How can I take this and translate it into something more plain language without losing the complexity of the concept, but make it like actually something that we can talk about without having all of the background, right? So these things are really important to me. I think that when you talk about a strategic use of language, I think those are things we can do, like playing with the poetics of it and finding that kind of common language around it to bring down the level of hype and to make it accessible to people again. I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, definitely, yes. I was particularly fascinated by the obfuscation of language that is enacted somehow by the predictive systems. And I mean, personally, one of my biggest concerns is how to prevent this obfuscation to pervade and permeate literally at some point our own way to express somehow, because in medium term we can even imagine something like that if the artificial production of content becomes I mean, literally permeates our way to express ourselves through language. So yes,
absolutely. It happens in a lot of places too. It happens in how we talk about it outside of the system, in how we're taught not to understand, not to think we should be able to understand AI systems because of the this hype. But then it's also happening inside the system, like with search terms, right? Where it's sort of simplified to, did you mean this rather than that, right? So it's sort of limiting what we might think we mean when we say something, or when we are chatting with a large language model and it doesn't recognize something we say, or it directs what we're talking about. Like all of this is a limitation. I've been experimenting with talking to it about Black queer poets or art topics that I'm interested in, or these sort of edge cases of where I think it might, where I'm talking about something completely, what I would say innocuous, but it thinks is a case of me breaking its terms and conditions, like queer feminist art projects, right? And these are really scary to me, because if it doesn't know about like my culture and it thinks that that's wrong, and then that's left out of its canon, it's limiting what I can say and know and talk with it about, and changing my sense of language and shaping who I am when I can talk with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which connects amazingly well to the to another statement that I found particularly inspiring of yours, when you say that AI privatizes power, which seems, I mean, to me, resonated directly to what, of course, the big five or big whatever number, Google, Microsoft, Meta, etc., have done with the global free services. That, I mean, these services and in general, their power has been possible because thanks to the network, I mean, that's my very humble and questionable analysis, but thanks to the network, the infrastructure, their commercial dynamics could scale up at a much faster pace than any possible state legal infrastructure could cope with. And this has led to privatization of power, because a lot of services that we now consider essential are run by private entities. So AI is probably the highest, the peak of this iceberg of power privatization. And I mean, we can talk about it forever, even just looking at the scary gatherings of power, where now we have the CEOs of these companies present in what used to be meetings of head of states or head of governments. It's quite scary somehow, but it's also understandable for the dynamics. But anyway, what I mean is that this now seems a consolidated paradigm, the privatization of power, and especially through AI. And you mentioned that unfortunately, or I mean, even sadly, but naturally, it's followed by legions of startups with the same mindset somehow. So since AI aims to be then again a universal entity, how, in your opinion, we can counteract this privatization? And based on what we were talking about, I mean, counteract for what we can realistically do. But I mean, what's your opinion in that? Should it be through language, as we were just saying, or should it be through exposing the hidden infrastructure, the hidden connection, as you have done with your work, with AI work called database? Or should it be a combination of strategies? Or, I mean, how should we somehow claim back that power should be a public and not private entity, especially for all the essential parts that we rely on?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, or $1 trillion question, I think. I do think it requires a combination of strategies, and it will take a lot of people smarter than me to figure it out along the way. But what I've been thinking about is, how can we address this at multiple levels simultaneously? So I think we need, it's not as simple as changing our individual behavior alone, but I think that there is something that, we can do individually. I think there's something we can do at a community level. And then I think that we can also think about this at legislative levels, or how we as communities can impact legislative levels. So part of why I started the project was thinking about how I was seeing these systems that I was using and the impact that they were having around the world. And did I really want to be a customer or a user of these systems if that was the case? And so I think that we can start, as we start mapping these connections, we can start thinking about, can I make different choices and choose to use tools that share my values? At the same time, I know that that's like choosing not to use a plastic straw when Enron is dumping oil into the ocean, that alone is not enough. But I do think that that is a difference that can be chosen. There's no reason to use these systems when there are open source alternatives. There are other companies making tools that aren't doing these things. And if there aren't, we can, as communities and practitioners, we can make those tools. So I think that at that level, that's something we can do as well. We can imagine and together create the kinds of AI systems we want to see, or create what we would rather see instead. Imagine entirely different kinds of systems. And we can advocate at a community level or a legislative level for funding for those types of systems instead. There's this huge push for digital sovereignty in Europe and to move away from these big tech companies, to not be beholden to them. But we don't want to just create the repeat of that. We could advocate for creating community types of power rather than just repeating that. So I think that if we are thinking about how we investing in systems that actually share our values, both at an individual level, a community level, and a state level, that would be what I would like to see. And it's maybe very ambitious, but I do think that it's important to kind of model for ourselves what we would like to see in the world, to show that it's possible, rather than believing that, well, there's nothing I can do, so I might as well continue on into the void. If those are our choices, I'm going to try to do the thing that looks like what I want to see in the world.
Great, thank you. There's another, the last aspect that I wanted to mention, or better, the last inspiring statement that you gave was, at some point you said, anything can become AI at any moment, which is both kind of scaring, but also made me think a lot. But can you elaborate a bit on that? Because I think it's a very important concept whenever we talk about AI, which is kind of missed in the discourse.
Sure. I think I was referring to the way that data gets siphoned up into AI systems. So taken out of context, that might not make sense. But what I was talking about was how you could be using a system or doing something out in the world that has no connection to AI at all. And without your knowledge or consent, it could later become part of an AI system. So, for example, you could be using WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is not an AI tool in any way, but we know that the WhatsApp messaging system Meta, its parent company, shared the data for that with the Unit 8200 in Israel to target people in Palestine and the West Bank for their using their AI systems. So it became part of the training data for an AI system, even though it itself, WhatsApp, is not an AI system. So it's not technically AI, but it can become any data, your banking data, anything that you do out in the world that could become data, could then, because terms and conditions are so loosey-goosey and we are not, we sometimes have no choice but to agree to them, it can become part of these systems. And so I think we often don't have a choice, but when we do, it can be helpful to think about where we want to opt out rather than opt in, both in sharing our data and in not choosing AI when it's added to a tool and things like this. But really looking at where AI is starting to kind of insidiously be added to everything that we're doing nowadays.
Yeah, it really stimulates many thoughts about it, and how it's a different it's at a different scale now, and there's not really a deep perception and awareness of how everything is interconnected, and how every single gesture then triggers a lot of dynamics around that we are not really aware of. I would like to end with a last question, which is about empathy, that you mention as a nodal element that is somehow forgotten. You said we have forgotten empathy during your keynote. Do you try to restore somehow empathy for your work? And more generally, how do you think we should restart to remember it or restart to use it?
I think that AI tools and the sort of scope of how we interact with the world digitally nowadays make it very easy to think about the impact of these systems at a very far distance, or not to think about the impact at all, that it can feel very abstract, that the language around AI is designed to make it feel very abstract and to, again, diffuse responsibility. And so part of the reason for starting the AI War Cloud database project was to show the connections across and to be able to reveal how, if something happens over here that feels far away in the world, you can draw a line from that to the tool that's on my phone, and to make it feel, again, that it's actually very close to home. And even if you're someone who doesn't care what's happening like over there, you should care, because if not for its own sake, because it's coming back home to roost where we are right now, whether it's because it's connected to an app on your phone, or because we've seen through history how the tactics and the methods and the tools that are developed in these vulnerable conflict zones end up being applied again in the places that they, the powerful nations, the colonizing nations, bring them back and use them upon their own citizens. That is historically the pattern that we see. So we heard from people in those prior discussions that you're referencing, we heard that is the pattern, and this is a cautionary tale for all of us, that this is how these systems will be used, and we see that through Palantir already, right? So it's not even a matter of empathy. It's a matter of warning, really. But I think that, I would love for us to understand that we have a responsibility to each other and we impact each other through being in the world and through the tools that we use, and that we're all a lot closer to each other than we think. And that's what I care about through language and through all of the digital tools that I make too. And I hope that thinking about this through these sort of revealing these kind of unseen or obfuscated strands helps us kind of get closer to understanding that again.
I think this was a perfect conclusion and the final answer. So let me thank you, Sarah, for your time and your very inspiring answers. And
thank you.
Warmest good luck for your future projects.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.